Well, I was born and brought up on a hill farm up in Tunbridge, and I was the oldest son. And my folks said, if you really want to farm, we've got to get off the hill, get down on the river. So it's quite a long story of how this evolved, but it began with Leon Miller, who was one of the owners of the farm. Leon and Everett Miller were half brothers, and they had to dispose of the farm to settle the estate. So that's where we came in, through Leon's efforts. Leon was with the Miller Auto Company in White River Junction, where my father got his truck. And so that's the beginning of the story. And then Leon was helpful all along the way. Now, we had no money to put into the farm at all. We sold what we had on a little farm up in Tunbridge. But down here we had to borrow everything, and the bank was very kind and extended our credit. So that what took place in early when I was 17 and then turned 18 and graduated from Hartford High School in 1946. Now, my father was more of a carpenter than he was a farmer. And so it was relatively easy for me to take over the, shall we say, the operation of the farm, because he was kind enough to let me make some decisions, even at a young age. But anything needed rebuilding or repairing on the farm, he did it. And that's a wonderful thing to be able to do, is the carpentry work. There's always some to be done on the farm. So my concentration came on the cattle, on the cows, and my folks sent me to what they called Graham Breeding School, just as I was out of high school down in Boston. And that was to learn the KCB, which is Keep Cows Breeding, which is an important part of the dairy operation. So that was my first and only venture into college. The other parts of the college came from county agents and traveling salesmen, and I have a lot of stories to tell. I was interested in getting married, of course, and my girlfriend was from Claremont, New Hampshire, so I spent several different times traveling back and forth there. We got married in October 2nd, 1949, and she was a wonderful farmer's wife. She worked right by my side. We worked together. And if I needed anything, I'd just say, honey, can you get me something? And she'd go and get it. But interesting thought there that my mother told her when we got married. She says, don't you ever start milking cows. If you do, you'll be stuck with it. And so she held on to that. But she did so many other things, like keeping the books. And we had two sons born in 1952 and 1954, and they were a big help on the farm, keeping things up and looking decent. And because we had developed at that time a breeder's herd, the cattle that we were breeding were popular. And went along through to 1978, we had a young bull that we had bred, and Tri-State Breeders in Columbus, Ohio became interested in him, and we sold the bull for $2,500 as a yearling. The hold that we had on him was that we could get 30 units of semen, of his semen, a year. Now you understand, on these bull studs, many bulls go in and very few of them prove out. Well, this bull, Limax Pawnee Memorial, worked out good for them. And he was producing something like 40,000 units of semen a year. selling at $30,000 a unit, $30 a unit, excuse me. And so that counts up after a while. So I guess if you want to say our claim to fame would be that we bred the bull, and we have a picture of him now in the barn with a Lemax prefix. And that Lemax comes from my father, who was Leslie E. Maxfield, and myself, Louis E. Maxfield, and my son, Lowell E. Maxfield. And so we got the Lemax because the cattle had to have a prefix, and that stuck with it. There's an awful lot to tell here, but we went along into 1985.
So why don't we stop right now? Stop right there, and we'll just say, and hold that thought. So you can begin in 1967 or the 60s, 66, when you were thinking about building that barn.
Right.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay. 1966, when the highway was coming through, 91, if they had come straight, they would come right through the farm. But they fortunately elected to go around the farm, which is the way the route is now. But what it did, they had some equipment in here, and we had a little gravel that we could sell, and so that helped out two ways. It lowered the area where we could have drainage from the farm, because we were really in the mud here. We were not high enough to really drain off either way, and that helped that. And they said, we'll do whatever you want while we're here, but once we leave, we're gone. So that's when we decided to, well, we will knock down all the old buildings. I think we had 3 old wood silos at that time, a manure shed, and the whole young cattle barn, the slaughterhouse, all of that. They came in with their bulldozers and pushed all those buildings right out into the field on a Saturday morning. When it worked, that happened almost as quick as I'm telling you. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. And we got a picture of the fire that they built out there. Then they went right into the hill and back, which is a sandy loam, and filled in a good 3 feet of what we'd been traveling in the mud. And that was the beginning. The big decision that we had in building the new barn, would we go traditional or would we go to what we call free housing? Because free housing at that time was just coming into the picture. All of the cows go in one group, and then you move the manure to one place, and that in itself creates an odor that is offensive to myself and everybody else. So here we are right in the edge of the village. So that was one reason we decided not to go that route, and to keep on with the traditional tying the cows up, releasing them, letting them go through the milking parlor, leave their milk, and back again for the exercise. And that worked out well, because as mentioned earlier, we had a breeder's herd. We sold some breeding cattle. And this is a part of that whole system. You take pictures and you keep things up to snuff, and you have visitors, and so all of that. And that was a good decision. And the Meachams are keeping up with it today, too. Actually, that's our new barn, but 1966. And new barns so they're older barns after years of use. Yeah. And that barn does need attention inside. And I understand it's hard for the Meachams to try to regulate their income so that they can do the things that ought to be done. So we're gradually working up to where we are now to raise funds to build up the barn where it'll be structurally useful. And I would say that looks nice too. There's both inside and outside that need attention.
So one if you read this prospectus, let me just stop that there so we can create another frame here. It said something about, and I'm not sure, maybe you can shed some light on this for me. The oldest house on the property was moved from a site closer to the Connecticut River to the bluff above the road.
That is something that I have no knowledge of.
Where that
The
came
thing, that's the house right adjacent here.
Oh, that's the one? Oh.
And when we renovated,
That's the oldest house?
yeah.
Really? Okay.
Main thing we know about that is when we, my son, that went to my son and his wife, and when we restructured that, took out the, opened up the wall, and there was a calendar, 1830. And so we think that that is when that was built, right there, which makes sense to me. And that was the original house, and then all of these down on the lower level were after that.
So that house apparently had been moved from somewhere on the Connecticut River.
I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know where that came from, but
I don't know where it came from.
Okay. And then the Millers, they built the actual Victorian house down here.
Right, 1905. And when we bought in 1945, 46, that was that was an up and coming new house at that time. The barn was built in 1892, and the slaughterhouse was before that. Now, back at that time, slaughtering was a big deal. So, and that, I could describe that slaughterhouse briefly. It was not a big building, but it had the big turnstile where you could pull the animal up, and really get done what it should. And that was I saved a barn board, wide board out of that. It was dated in 1988. So we know that, and then we know that the big barn was built in 1892. So that was the first real structure that I know of, down on the lower level. Water was a problem. That's another whole story to tell. Interesting here at the house on the hill, I do know where the water came from that. There's still a cleft in the rock out the further end of the field, and they built a little cement cistern there to hold the water. And from that point to this house here, it ran I think it was 1/2-inch lead pipe. And it's amazing how these early settlers could get the levels and know just where they're at. But there was enough pressure from out there so that it would run upstairs into this house, into a wooden tub. And that would create pressure from anything down below. That was how they got the pressure for water down below. And I found that very interesting. But when they got to the big barn, you got to have more water. There's another well right up around back of the hill. Yeah. The remnants are still there to feed that. And then there's still more stories on the water. Finally ending up, the hot water spring was out in the other side of the buildings, up in the edge of the woods, and that fed the hot water tank in the house. And then there's another one we built. I guess I better put this in. Yeah, I think I should mention the water, because that is so important for a lot of water use is needed. So early on, my father got a well drilling outfit in. And he said, we get this near the house, and then you won't have a lot of piping to do and so on. So they drilled right in what's the back side of the house this way, and they did. You got a suitable amount of water. Next thing we know, next thing meaning maybe a few months later, the water didn't taste too good. So we investigated, and when they drilled, they went right down by the septic system that comes from the drain from the house. And so that operation was canceled. And we went up back of the barn and got another good source of water. And I don't remember the whole essence of that, but here we are, the town water's going right by in front of our house. So now the town water comes from our land, the farm's land, up on the other side of the river, and a beautiful supply up there. And it worked well to go down, you had to come across the river with the pipe. And it seemed though every spring the pipe would go out with the ice. So that created a continuing problem. And there's more to do with water supply, but ended up finally that the town water established a well, which is down here now by the river. And it's all passed all the tests. And so that worked good from there to supply the village, and the farm had a chance then to get in as part of the source of the water. Before that, I think there was a fear that the farm would take so much that the rest of the village wouldn't get any. Well, that never came to pass. So right now, Steve, there's a big tank up, I don't know, 100,000 gallons up in the woods here. The water is pumped from down by the river up into this tank, and that supplies and provides pressure for the whole village.
Interesting. Now, what about the dam here? When was that built? That was
the which?
The dam up here, the Heartland Dam. When was that built?
1960. It was before the highway. If they'd had that in earlier, Hartford, Connecticut would have been, quote unquote, saved, or at least partly, because this isn't the only dam feeding the Connecticut River. There are others too. Union Village Dam does the same thing. So that was the purpose of the dam. And I've seen that dam when it was almost full. There's a lot of water holding back, waiting for the right time to go.
Oh yeah, yeah. So this is an interesting.
That was taken 2 years ago.
That was taken 2 years ago. Now let's talk a little bit about a few of these pictures.
I know the barn was. I think since Ed and Kelly been here, I think they have painted the farmhouse. But the barn, that was the last time the barn was painted, yep.
So could we back up a little bit and just talk about that as a complete thought? So just start by saying the last time the barn was painted, and then talk a little bit about that, okay? Thanks.
And Albert Sprague from Chelsea approached us and said that he would paint it. This is all by hand, of course. And there's actually a picture of him right up on top of the cupola there now. And that is a little further off the ground than I want to get. I think it's around 70 feet into the peak of the barn, and then you got the cupola on top of that. And it's too high up for me. But so we did as we could and tried to plan on keeping it painted, but now the longer it goes, the harder it is. You got clapboards to replace and the priming, and I've done just enough painting, so I know the hardest job is the preparation. Once you get it prepared so that it will stay. And that, I remember my wife and I, Peggy, our first wife, we painted the little building right across the road. That used to be a 3-car garage. And boy, I had a lot of scraping to do on that. And it's lasted since then, and it's pretty near ready to be painted again now. It's something, if you're going to paint, it's got to be done. You got to keep up on it. Once you let it go, it gets away from you. That was actually a horse barn. And in that day, the horses were very important. As I recall, there were 3 horses here when we came, the 2 work horses and then the carriage horse or the saddle horse. And that single horse was important for pulling the hay fork rope up into the hay, up into the barn, and other single jobs, cultivating and whatnot. So in the front of that barn, the front meaning the south end, you'll see little windows. Those little windows, there was one for each horse stall.
I see those, yeah.
Yeah, and so that was, and the rest of the barn was for the harnesses and the buggies and that thing. Now, of course, it is a shop now. That's what they changed it into. But it's interesting to note that when we came here in '46, that was a horse barn with horses in it, with all the things that go with it. Well, if you go into, you can't drive in at all three structures. The second floor, you cannot actually drive into that, but we used it a lot for storage of grain and so on. And on that same level, there was a door, I think the door is still there, on the west side that opens up, and that's where the cows came in off to the hill into that second story. And those, if you look inside, the treads where the cows were is still there, the gutter is still there. And at that time, the manure disposal was you just open up the scuttle and put the manure right down below. Well, that works good, but if you have a lot of it over a period of time, it can tend to eat away at the supports that structure the whole barn. I don't think that actually happened. I don't think there was enough, and many cows, I don't think they milked more than 15 or so at that time. We were milking 24 when I came here, but that was a cement stable at that time. And that was one of our things that we needed if we were going to change farms. We had to be in a cement stable. And so I don't know exactly when that cement was put in the stable, but not too awful long before we came here.
Now, you had mentioned the L off of the big barn here.
Yes.
That's supposed to be, I guess, the oldest structure. That was you mentioned something about it being reattached or attached.
But I am not able to say. Most of that is speculation, whether I think the big barn was built first and this was attached to it, as near as I can tell. Whether it was moved from another spot, I do not know. I just can't speculate on that. Okay. But when we came, that was not serving a big purpose. We had some young cattle out there, and the rest of it was sort of kind of waste space. And so,
as it is now, still kind of waste space.
Well, no. What we saved from that is the storage for hay upstairs. And the immediate floor above it is we've got storage for potato hoes and odd machinery of that nature.
Yeah, the most of this other stuff are repair details, and this was updated. We just updated this. Let me show you. I'm going to stop this. I'm going to show you what I did with the Meachams here.